I remember my childhood pretty well. It wasn't joyful and it can't be called happy in any way. I grew up frail and sickly. I had a developmental delay. Until I was 4.5 years old, I did not speak, only uttered incomprehensible sounds. The most vivid memory of my childhood still gives me goosebumps and a sticky feeling of fear, as usually happens when a person encounters something they cannot explain. My mother raised me alone and worked all day, leaving me with my grandmother. According to her, she went to another city at that time and, of course, Grandma was looking after me. She was already quite old and could hardly walk. I remember her kind, wrinkled face and already faded blue eyes. She wore funny polka dot scarves and flowered robes, and she always smelled like fresh milk or fresh bread. I loved climbing on her lap and listening to her already muffled, but still pleasant voice. She told me a lot of interesting stories, but unfortunately, of course, I didn't remember them. That day, Grandma went to the store and left me watching TV for a while, although she wasn't his supporter, but apparently she thought he should distract me. I remember that she was gone for a long time, and I was very scared, because I, like all small children, was very afraid when adults stayed late. When I started to whimper, Grandma returned, but without any purchases. Although it was hard for her to walk, she never showed it, but when she returned, it was noticeable that she was in great pain. There were tears in her eyes, and I started crying myself, but she tried to calm me down and eventually I fell asleep. The following days, I began to notice oddities, but at that age, of course, I did not connect them with each other. I just noticed that something had changed in her behavior. She practically didn't talk to me, her face was angry and distorted, and yet, she began to smell strangely sweet, but meanwhile terribly unpleasant. She regularly cooked porridge for me and put me to sleep, but when I wanted to climb on her lap, I was scolded. I remember crying for a long time, from resentment. The smell from her intensified, and even now I shudder. It was such a disgusting fragrance. I remember that my grandmother was having difficulty drawing out the words and coughing terribly, talking to my mother on the phone, saying that everything was fine. And one morning, I woke up and realized that my grandmother was gone. I walked around the house and looked for her, and then I cried for a long time. I had a real tantrum. That was the first time I spoke, and my first words was Grandma. A neighbor, hearing my screeching, persistently rang the doorbell to see if everything was in order. Apparently she called my mother. A few hours later, my mother arrived, and I saw confusion and incomprehension on her face. That day, she left me at a neighbor's and she was gone for a long time. Only in the evening she returned and cried all evening. And then she walked around sad and dressed only in black. I never saw my grandma again, but when I grew up, I found out what really happened. It turns out that when Grandma went to the store, a pack of dogs attacked her in one of the dark alleys. The feral mutts beat her and dragged her behind the trash cans. It was on the day when my mother returned that the trash cans were taken out and my grandmother's half-rotted body was found, because it was hot then. My mom claimed that she was in complete shock when she realized that she had been talking to Grandma when she was already dead. And after that, my mother went to church for a long time and often took me with her. We lit a lot of candles for her repose and even invited my father to light our apartment. I do not know how to explain everything that happened, but I'm sure Grandma didn't mean to hurt me. Only this terrible cloying smell of rotting human body still haunts me.